All right, you have made it to the last video. Go you. This section is developing intercultural communication competence. So, just reminding you back to chapter 1 when we learned about communication competence. That is what we're shooting for here. Communication competence is just, knowing how to communicate respectively and respectfully. There you go. Respectfully and ethically in any situation, and also the feeling of being comfortable, having social ease in that situation. So, when you think about intercultural communication, the issue is that sometimes we run into culture shock that kind of causes us not to feel competent in our communication within that intercultural situation. So, that like for us as communicators, and what I hope that you'll learn in this class is how to start going into new situations that maybe is something you're not used to, but you can still feel competent in your communication skills. So, the first thing we want to do is look at potential barriers. Potential barriers might be anxiety, like you may just have anxiety about having to go into this situation and communicate with someone, like just like simply not knowing the language. That would be a major reason you would have anxiety and kind of have potential barrier to your ability to communicate well and be competent in your communication, right? I know I feel that right now. So I've been doing Duolingo and learning Spanish, and I can read Spanish pretty well now. But I mean, I've been doing this for a couple months. But I still get anxiety every time I'm out. Like every time that I go to or put myself in a situation where I could speak Spanish, I freeze up and I'm like, I don't want to do it, right? And I think about my students that I've had that have spoken different language, man, and I am just so proud of the students that I've had that English is their second language, because I know how much anxiety that probably creates within them or you when you go into a classroom and the teacher's not speaking your native language. So please, if that is you, you're a rock star. Not a lot of people can do that. Okay, so anxiety. Then we have assumed similarity or difference. Remember, we learned about that, I believe, in our perception chapter on why we might like try to force somebody or try to, while we perceive someone a certain way that's not necessarily accurate, right? Because we're trying to assume similarity, or it's like assume we perceive things the same way, and we assume that we're too different to understand each other. It's the same kind of thing here, right? You can go into a situation and assume a barrier might be to assume that this person is like you, and they really don't have the same life experiences because of where they're from. There may be things that your brain chooses to select. I remember we think about the perception process. You may select things about a person and say, okay, that makes us alike, so they probably think this way. And they might think, no, that's not at all how I think or anything. That's assumed similarity, just like selecting one aspect of a person and assuming that you're similar. But on the flip side of that, you might go into a situation and think like, oh, they're not from where I'm from, so there's no way they could see things the way that I see them. And that's that assumed difference. And so that might be a barrier for intercultural communication. You may not want to engage with that person if you think that they're so different, regardless of language barrier, like genuinely that you just think that they're too different. You have different values. We just see things differently. So I don't even really want to engage with that. Okay, so then there's this thing called ethnocentrism, and I kind of think about this as being egotistical. But ethnocentrism is really just thinking or believing that your culture is superior to others, right? Believing that who you are is somehow better than the people around you. Like right now in my head, I really didn't even want to say this, but I mean, I think about like Ku Klux Klan and things like that, like just the hate that's happened in our society, in our world, associated from believing that somebody is a superior race or a superior type of person. I mean, this is like what causes, like when we think about the Holocaust, and we think about slavery, all of these things they're all started from ethnocentrism. So, like while you may think like this is something that's a major issue, but like we may not think that you struggle with that. Like you may not think you struggle with it. I may not think I struggle with it because we aren't doing those kind of crazy, big, terrible things. But it still applies to like daily little things as well. any type of view that you are somehow superior to someone else based on something about yourself. And so today, what that looks like is something like what might be like a microaggression, and microaggressions are like little things people say that just kind of show in some way that they think they're above you. That can lead to microaggressions. It can also lead to biases. And so believing that certain people, I mean, you may not even recognize some of it, but like thinking that someone's uh, having a tendency to be a little bit more biased towards someone because of some aspect about them. So those things still happen today, but that is definitely a barrier to strong intercultural communication competency. All right, then we have stereotyping, of course, and I think that it's kind of like before in the last chapter in perception, where we talk kind of as a building thing, like selective perception, and then force similarity or differences, and then you like force consistency, like you try to make you believe that, which kind of then leads to stereotyping, which they can lead to things like racism and any type of like, I guess, ism, you could say, thinking that like one of your cultures is better than another culture. So that's where we stereotype, and we kind of we perceive one group of people or one group of one culture in a certain way, and we just decide, well, that's what you are. They're all like that. Everybody in that group, they're all like it, and that's hardly, if not ever, the case. So incompatible communication codes. So communication codes, we haven't learned about language, like specifically like the building of language. We haven't learned that yet. So you may not understand, like communication codes are, I mean, that's like language. That's like a code. We'll talk about that later. But then also just like culturally, like you may have like words that are used different, or like they're differently used. So a great example of this was I went to Turkey last year, and I had to use the restroom so bad, and I was running around asking all these people, and luckily, a lot of people at this resort that I was at, they all spoke English, or lots of them did. So so I'm talking to them, I'm talking to people, I'm like, please, like, I need to use the restroom, where's the restroom, where's the restroom? And they kept looking at me, and they're like, I'm sorry, what are you asking for? What are you asking for? And they kept grabbing other people, like, what is she asking for? And then finally, the manager that like came up and he was like, "What are you needing to do in this? Like, what are you needing to do?" And I said, "Oh, I need to pee." And he started laughing. He goes, "Oh, so you need the toilet?" And I was like, "Well, that's a very just straightforward way to put it. Yes, I need the toilet." So he said, "Okay." Well, he was like, "I'll show you the way." But then as we were walking there, he said, "Sorry, we understand. We know British English, not American English. We don't get a lot of American English speakers here." And so there's certain words that literally the communication, like it might be the same language, but the communication codes are different. And so that can cause some barriers in our ability to communicate well. And then incompatible norms and values. Sometimes when you have two cultures that are so like on opposite ends of the spectrum, that sometimes when we walk into situations, the highly valued norms of two societies clash, or they like are so opposite. So that might make you feel really uncomfortable. It might make you not understand them. Again, in Turkey, I felt like their society was very different. I really liked a lot of it. But one of the things was like how much they care about animals. It was so different. Like we were amazed at this. Like the guy that was driving us, he like was telling us how they would stop, and like if they hit a bird, they would go and like take the bird to a vet and make sure the bird was okay, because that was just normal to them. Whereas for us, we would just be like, well, you get bird flu if you do that, So, but you see, there's the different values, and if we told him that we wouldn't have done that, they probably would have thought we were terrible people, right? But that is sometimes our norms and our values are so vastly different that it causes a barrier in our ability to communicate well. All right, so then let's talk about competent communication strategies. So now that you know like what can cause the barrier, let's go, what can we do to make it better? First, we should acquire accurate knowledge. So I'm just going to kind of go through this quickly. The way we can acquire knowledge is through formal study, like actually maybe going and watching a video, going on YouTube, learning about a society, reading up on it, like just actual formal study. And then there's observation. So maybe you're like more so, it says non-participant observation, like you can watch more so, like this might be like when you look at National Geographic, or if you watch Discovery or something. I feel like there was shows that are history right? Like you can watch about cultures kind of as like a non-participant observer. Then you have immersion, and that's going to be more like if you did a study abroad program, right? You go in there and you're there and you learn. So that would be participant observation. All right, then you could adopt, or you should adopt, an appropriate attitude, and that's going to mean tolerate ambiguity. Ambiguity means kind of like a fluidity, differences, right? Like that things are not always going to be like perfectly defined. It's kind of like, I guess I could kind of translate that to like vagueness. That might be a way to put it. It says if you enter in an intercultural interaction believing that it is okay to be unsure about how to proceed, you're likely to pay closer attention to the feedback you receive. You can then work on to adjust your communication to demonstrate respect and achieve mutual understanding. So like not going into something assuming everyone's like you, right? But going in, or assuming everyone's different, just going in with an open mind, which then I think leads us to the next one, which is be open-minded. You have to be open-minded in order to be able to tolerate ambiguity, right? For things not to be perfectly defined, you have to be open-minded to that. And so also open-minded to differences in people and understanding. One of the best things that I hope that I can teach you is that, understanding does not mean that you have to believe someone is right or change who you are. It just means you understand them. And when you can understand, you can then respect them and their values and their culture, right? So that's really important. Be open-minded. Be altruistic. Altruism is a display of genuine and unselfish concern for the welfare of others. This is the opposite of being egocentric, meaning like you genuinely care about other people and want to understand them fully. Again, just trying to understand, not necessarily that you're changing yourself or anything along those lines. And then let's see, the last thing would be develop culture-centered skills. So the first thing and probably the most important thing any of us can learn is to practice listening. Yes, practice listening. Then we should practice empathy. So intercultural empathy means imaginatively placing yourself in the other person's cultural world and attempting to experience what he or she is experiencing. I feel like this has to do with open-mindedness, right? Like you have to put yourself in someone else's shoes to get where they're coming from. And in doing so, then you're going to have automatically have more, be more altruistic, meaning like you're going to care more, like genuinely care more and understand better. Probably going to be open-minded more, all those things, but empathy. And then develop flexibility. And this again goes with tolerate ambiguity. Flexibility is the ability to adjust your communication to fit the other person in the situation. That's something that is really important, being able to understand like good, competent communicators. They listen, they pay attention, they genuinely care about making the other person feel comfortable in the space, and they want to not change themselves, but they want to understand and be able to coincide and coexist with someone that may be from a very different culture than your own. So, all right, I hope that this helps you, and I hope that you'll really pay attention to this and really try moving forward, because this isn't just like one big dominant culture to another dominant culture. This is like in your own dominant, like in your own culture, like in American society, understanding a co-culture to another co-culture, right? Some like a culture that does seem very different than your own, trying to understand them, being able to coexist with them.